The tangled, island-studded coast of Argyll creates a labyrinth of lochs and islands where travellers never seem far from the legends and myths of the past. Some of my earliest childhood memories are of the lochs along this coast, a place where the history of generations is literally written into the landscape. Scotland's lochs are a product of an element we have in spectacular abundance: water. With so much of the stuff about, it's hardly surprising that there are tens of thousands of lochs in Scotland, and they come in all shapes and sizes. We've got long fjord-like sea lochs, great freshwater lochs of the Central Highlands, and innumerable lochans that stud the open moors. In this series, I'm setting out on a loch-hopping journey across Scotland, meeting the people who live close to their shores and discovering how lochs have influenced an entire nation. For this grand tour, I'm following a route from the west coast, travelling the length of Scotland's longest freshwater loch. My journey takes me from a sacred place on the Atlantic coast, heads north through a landscape littered with ancient monuments to the shores of Loch. Sailing among its mythical islands, I discover a hollow mountain and a witch who drowned an entire landscape. This is Loch Sween, an arm of the sea facing the mountainous paps of Jura. The word Sween derives from an Old Norse name for a leader called Sven, who is said to have once ruled here. And this beautiful stretch of white shell sand is Kilmorey Bay, a place I've known since childhood. When I was a wee boy, my parents would drive us down here for weekends by the sea, and we'd camp on the sheep-cropped grass of the Macker. We'd collect driftwood and build fires and cook whelks in a bucket. Those were really great days. Now, there's something about the idyllic beauty of this place that seems to exude a magic all of its own, which was something that my mother put down to the history of Kilmorey and its ancient chapel, where the past is recorded in stone. I seem to remember a croft here at Kilmorey, just behind the chapel. It was run by a grey-haired woman called Mary, which my mother thought was highly appropriate. Kilmorey meaning Mary's Chapel in Gaelic. Mary has long gone, but the chapel still remains. Built in the 1200s, it was used as a place of worship until the Reformation of the 16th century. Now this is pretty much as I remember it when I was a wee boy. Got lines of beautifully carved grave slabs leaning up against the chapel wall. And behind me, we've got a very interesting early Christian cross-marked grave slab, which actually dates from the 10th or perhaps even the 9th century, which would make them older than the original chapel here. But these later grave slabs dating from the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, show the knights with their swords, their great unsheathed swords. And on top of the slabs, we've got a very significant and important symbol. This is an image of the Great Highland War Galley, or Berlin, which was very significant in this part of the world. Now, over here is the Macmillan's Cross, which is quite simply a superb example of the stonemason's craft. There's a sword on this side, and on the reverse side, we've got a fabulous hunting scene with a deer being chased by hounds. But on this side, as you'd expect, the crucified Christ on his cross, and by his side, his mother Mary, after whom this chapel is dedicated. It really is a superb piece of work. Back in my kayak, I head up the loch. The chapel of Kilmorey symbolised spiritual power, which went hand in hand with the earthly power wielded by the mighty Lord of Loch Sween, who gave his name to an entire clan, Clan MacSween. And it was from this magnificent castle that he ruled the surrounding lands. Castle Sween, or Sven's Castle, guards the ancient lands of Knapdale and is thought to be the oldest surviving castle on the Scottish coast. In medieval Scotland, the area thrived, but emigration and afforestation have altered the culture and landscape. But with change comes opportunity. Today, Knapdale Forest has attracted some unusual new residents. The incomers I'm talking about are European beaver. And although they've only been resident for a few years, they were once common throughout Scotland and would have been familiar to the men who sailed the Highland war galleys of old. Beavers in Britain were hunted to extinction 400 years ago. But now they're back, thanks to a series of initiatives across Europe to save the species from extinction. This is the lovely Loch, where I've come in hope of glimpsing beaver. Guiding me is Ben Harrower and his faithful spaniel, Dottie.
If the beaver's on the loch or riverside, usually the first thing you'll see is a tree that's been cut or partially cut, or a branch that's been snipped, and other signs would include a dam or a lodge as well along the shoreline.
So these trees that we're seeing here have been felled by beavers?
Yeah.
That's a sizable stump then, isn't it? It's hard to believe that a beaver could have just chewed through that.
Yeah. Now on our right is the feeding station that the pair use. Have been using all winter, so they take the material here, usually strip the branches of the bark.
Do they eat what they cut down then?
Yeah.
Are they herbivores?
They're strict herbivores, yeah.
I thought they ate fish. Shows you how ignorant I am.
No, they definitely do not eat fish.
So they eat together, they live together in the lodge, they do things collectively like build dams and fell trees. I mean, it's a proper little community.
Paddling through a flooded landscape, we come to the most telling signs of beaver on the loch.
That's the dam. It's quite large, this one, probably maybe 15 metres.
So the beavers have dragged logs and stopped the outlet of the wee loch and flooded it. So this is all flooded territory.
Yeah.
How long did it take them to build this dam?
They built it within 6 months. A lot of the structure was there, but 9 months in total to get this sort of 15-metre stretch of dam built.
And are your beavers busy beavers?
Well, yeah. Every night they'll be servicing this dam, checking on it, and if there's a breach, they're usually quite quick in repairing it. So yeah, if they're living on this loch, they generally keep this dam well maintained.
Well, that's like maintaining the roof over your head, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all part of beaver life.
Despite all the evidence of beaver activity, I'm disappointed not to have seen one. However, remote cameras set up near the dam might have recorded their activity. If we're lucky, perhaps I'll get my beaver shot after all. Together with Ben's colleague, Jill Dowes, we examine some potential beaver footage.
Oh, what? Is that the beaver?
Yes, yeah,
wow.
There's one there.
It looks like a giant guinea pig, I have to say.
Yes, they're about the size of a tubby spaniel. They're a bit bigger than you think, really.
Is this a night vision shot? Is that why we're seeing it in black and white?
Yeah, that's right. What else have we got? It's brilliant. You can see the tail
wow,
there.
This is tail.
Yeah, so that's
a
fantastic.
massive beaver's tail.
Yeah,
and
goes
swimming
off. That's fantastic. That's great footage.
Oh, I love that.
What else have we got?
Is there two?
Well,
is
no, there's just one. It's quite difficult to tell because it's night vision here.
So you don't have face recognition cameras for beavers yet?
No, it's quite difficult to tell the animals apart, and certainly the male and female.
How long have you been involved in the project?
I'm incredibly lucky. I've been working with the trial since 2009 when it started. It's fantastic. It's the first mammal to be reintroduced back to the UK, and it's 400 years since they've been extinct.
This is amazing.
Very exciting.
Oh, what's this?
Yes. Oh, wow, fantastic.
Oh, that's an otter.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So that's from here.
An otter using the dam.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, no, that's great footage.
Oh, wow.
Fantastic. And that's daytime as well.
Daytime.
That's really nice footage.
A daylight shot of the beaver.
The teeth are really long on a beaver and they continue growing, they never stop growing. And they're really, really dark orange because they take in the tannin from the bark and that sort of strengthens their teeth.
So it's not nicotine stain?
No. And you tell it's an adult because the tail's quite wide.
So it feels entirely natural for you to see beavers here. It's the right thing.
Yes, fantastic. Yeah, it's wonderful. And I'm incredibly privileged to be able to sit on a loch on an evening and actually watch these beavers swimming around. It's wonderful.
Knapdale, with its hills, lochs and hollows, makes ideal habitat for beaver engineers and forms a network of waterways that were exploited by human engineers to supply a constant source of water for the famous Crinan Canal. Completed in 1801, the canal provides a 14-kilometre shortcut from the Firth of Clyde to the Atlantic. Where the canal reaches Loch Crinan in the west, a small community quickly grew up. Crinan is still a busy place, and the boatyard is a hive of activity. Among the modern craft is a relic from the past, a vessel that once graced millions of television screens as the good ship, the Vital Spark, a little steamship or puffer that plied the coastal trade in the early years of the 20th century. Now renamed Old Reekie, she was built in 1943 and is undergoing extensive restoration by a group of enthusiasts. I joined Douglas Smith to lend a hand.
Now, Douglas, you've been working on this boat for quite a while. When did you first get involved?
It was 10 years ago, 2008 we started. Well, the idea first was mooted among some of our friends. Duncan McGilvery, he's at home in Islay just now, and him and a friend decided to buy this and do it up.
What was he thinking of?
I would like to know, but...
Because that must be a major undertaking to restore and refurbish an old boat like this.
100 ton of scrap iron, is that what you're trying to say? Yeah, it was a huge undertaking, but it's getting there now after 10 years, so hopefully within another 2 years that should see it completed.
And what sort of state was she when you first clapped eyes on her, as they say?
Well, she was in not too bad a state because we sailed it through the Crinan Canal. And it's when we pulled it up the slip here and pressure washed it, we discovered all the holes in the hull. Fairly lucky we got through the Crinan Canal without a major accident.
She was a bit like a sieve, was she?
She was a sieve.
But these puffers, I suppose, for a man like yourself from Islay, would have a place in your memory and in your heart.
That's right, that's right. As kids, we used to jump on the bikes and go up to Buchlady and watching the puffers coming into the pier, mainly for the distilleries. You go up there and there might be 4 or 5 of them sitting off the pier waiting to get in. You know, they hauled the barley in for the distilleries and took the whisky out to the mainland.
That must have been a good job for the men involved, taking the whisky out.
Well, there's lots of good stories, but I can't tell you just now.
So these were a vital part of island life at one time.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're bringing this one back to life.
Yeah, it's been a big team effort.
Leaving Crinan, I head north, passing through Kilmartin Glen, which boasts one of the most archaeologically rich landscapes in Britain. For 10 kilometres, the route passes through a concentration of over 350 ancient monuments, including cairns, standing stones, stone circles and hill forts.
If that wasn't enough, there's more prehistoric rock art to be found here than anywhere else in Great Britain. And hidden amongst the woods and up on the hills are hundreds of sites where strange symbols have been cut into the stone. Now, despite the best efforts of academics and archaeologists, they remain ultimately mysterious.
Kilmartin Glen is one of the most prolific areas for rock art in Great Britain. To lead me into this lost world is archaeologist Erin Watson.
It's very difficult to date carvings in a rock, but by association with sites elsewhere and through excavation, we have a pretty good sense that they're between 4,000 and 5,000 years old.
Right, so about as old as the pyramids.
Archaeologists have puzzled over the meaning of these mysterious carved rings. Erin has his own interpretation.
We do see the circle almost everywhere we go in the Neolithic. This shape, this form, is somehow fundamental to the beliefs of these people. not far from here in Kilmartin Glen, there are built monuments which take the circular form. And rather than us just looking at the surface of the rock and seeing circles, you can actually move into these monuments, which create a circular boundary around you. And they seem to be carefully positioned in the landscape, so that when you look at the hills around, they also seem to surround you. Perhaps these people are seeing themselves as being at the centre of the world.
Placing myself at the centre of things, I take a photograph of the cup and ring marks and then head north, making for my next destination, the mighty Lochs. Lochs is Scotland's longest freshwater loch. From the southwest, it stretches northeast for over 40 kilometres. Rarely more than 2 kilometres wide, Lochs boasts ancient picturesque castles and wooded mythological islands. The loch is also on the route taken by the drovers of old. Here at Portsonocan, cattle were once taken across the loch on their way to market. Today, the descendants of those cattle have become Scottish icons. Queenie Strickland is a modern cattle breeder who well understands the heritage of her herd.
Queenie, we're surrounded by your cows here. Now, these are traditional Highland cattle, are they?
Yes, they are. Originally they were black, but they have bred the black out. Well, not all of them, and they've made some red.
Well, you're a cattle breeder, so you've been breeding cattle for what particular purpose?
As a hobby.
As a hobby?
As a hobby, yes. It was started off as a hobby and it's now got slightly more serious.
How many cattle have you got here, Queenie?
At the moment, about 100.
So 100's more than a hobby. It's moved on beyond that now, is that?
I suppose, yes. You can say that, I suppose.
So are you breeding to sell them on?
Yes, we sell the females, yes, for breeding. And the ones that don't make it, they end up, I'm afraid, as hamburgers.
You shouldn't say that sort of thing.
You're not going to be a
Queenie,
hamburger, are
in
you,
amongst
Jake?
these beautiful beasts, there'll never be hamburgers.
Queenie is just as unsentimental and pragmatic as the old cattle drovers would have been when beef formed the mainstay of the Highland economy. To discover more about this lost way of life, John Kay undertook an experiment in living history. In the 1980s, he spent 6 weeks walking a small herd of cattle from Skye to Crieff in Perthshire, a distance of over 200 miles.
So when you were conducting this experiment, was there anything in particular that you learned about the art of cattle droving?
Yes, it's very slow. Your rate of progress is probably about 1.5 miles an hour. But I mean, the most instructive thing to me was the importance of keeping their feet in good condition. Their feet wear very rapidly on surfaces like this, loose. In the old days, they actually used to shoe them. You know, with a horse, you've got a round hoof and you put a horseshoe on it. With cattle, they've got a cloven foot. So they had to have 2 plates, 2 shoes on each foot. I mean, I was really interested in the drove roads originally. And the first thing you would discover is there are no drove roads in the Highlands, there are only drove routes. And even when the military roads are built, drovers, for the most part, avoided them.
Did they really?
Well, partly because what you want the cattle to do is to graze their way across the hills, because that way they get plenty to eat and remain in good condition, hopefully.
Did you enjoy the experience?
Yes, yeah, I was. I mean, by the end of it, I was absolutely exhausted. I mean, we all were completely dead on our feet, but it was fun. Well, I mean, what I hadn't realised is the extraordinary bond that builds up between the cattle and the drovers. You know, after 6 weeks together, sleeping out on the hill together and so on, you get to know one another pretty well.
So it was a whole way of life and a whole rhythm, and
Yes.
you and the cattle were attuned to each other.
And that was incredibly satisfying. I mean, living very close to animals is very rewarding.
So, really noisy beasts, aren't they? What's the matter with that one?
What was that?
Leaving John and Queenie to round up the herd, I returned to the shores of the loch. In Victorian times, early tourists could enjoy the delights of Lochs from the decks of pleasure steamers. To recreate a sense of the cruising heyday, I've joined Paddy Shaw, who skippered the last commercial steamer on the Loch, and Roger Martin aboard his boat, the Bunnahabhain.
Why Bunnahabhain?
It's an Isle of whiskey.
Right.
And there's a bit of a tradition in Scotland to name steamboats after whiskies.
Is there indeed?
Yes.
And how old is the Bunnahabhain?
The hull was built in 1999, and the engine in 2002, and the boiler about the same time.
So she's pretty new boat.
Yes.
But she looks much older.
She's based on an Edwardian design, and so it's got the classic lines with the straight bow and the counter stern, and the nice curve to it, and funnel leaning back.
She's a beautiful looking boat. And all powered by this wonderful little steam engine.
Indeed. Yes.
Absolutely tiny. Almost looks like a model to me.
Well, some people look upon it as model engineering. It's a twin cylinder, high pressure, double acting steam engine. And it produces about 4 or 5 brake horsepower.
Is that all?
That's all. And it takes the boat at 6.5 miles an hour.
That's fantastic, isn't it? Who would have thought?
Yeah.
Of course, the Bunnahabhain is equipped with a steam whistle, and I can't restrain myself any longer.
Can I have a shot?
Oh, please do. Go on.
Is that hot?
No, it's not too hot. Halfway up, yeah.
Yeah, that lonesome whistle blow.
Paddy Shaw skippered the last commercial steamer on the Loch, the Lady Rowena, taking tourists aboard for pleasure trips.
It must be quite difficult navigating the Loch at night, I would have thought, because there's no navigation aids as far as I can see along the shore.
Well, that's right. We used to take young people, especially, to dances down in Delavik, right down at the other end of the Loch. And it was all right till coming back, and it was sometimes pitch dark. And also the crowd would be quite sort of good form kind of thing. And we had to, one of the problems being no navigational aids, I had to prime some of the householders in the area to keep a light on here and there so I knew where I was.
The Bunnahabhain takes us at a steady pace among the legendary islands in the Loch. This is Freyach, which in myth was once guarded by a dragon, and a sense of mystery and imagination still hangs heavy over the waters of the Loch. Here on the shore to the north, the creatures of legend seem to have found a home. This is St Conan's Kirk, one of the most remarkable and eccentric churches in Scotland. It looks as if it's come straight from the pages of a Gothic romance.
This extraordinary church was built by local laird Walter Campbell, who lived on one of the islands in the Loch.
Walter wasn't trained as an architect, which might explain why his creation is such a bizarre blend of different ecclesiastical styles and periods. There are Saxon doorways, Gothic windows, Romanesque arches, Norman columns. Anything that took Walter's fancy was in. And the result is quite wonderful, exuberant and unrestrained. Walter began work here in 1907, but tragically he died before his dream project was completed, leaving his sister to realise his vision. And it wasn't until 1930 that the first church service took place here.
Walter never left St Conan's, not even in death, because he was buried here, and this is his effigy, looking for all the world like a knight of old who's fallen into a deep slumber at the end of some holy quest. And what's he dreaming about? Well, probably this is his dream, and you walk through it every time you enter St Conan's Kirk.
The dreaming spires of St Conan's Kirk and the myths and legends that inspired it are a far cry from the architecture that dominates my next destination. Just along the loch and beneath the shapely peak of Ben Cruachan is an entrance to an underworld. But this is no gateway to a fabled land. This is modernity. Yet even here, in the heart of the Hollow Mountain, there is something mythic about the scale of the engineering.
Now, David, we've come quite a long way to get here. How deep are we into the mountain?
So we're 400 metres below the surface of Ben Cruachan and 1 kilometre in from Lochs.
Right. And this is, if you're talking about cavernous, this really is an enormous space that's been dug out of the mountain.
Yes.
Now, is that the main generating hall we're looking at?
That's the main generating hall. That contains 4 turbine generator units, or in the case of Cruachan, motor generator units, because the station is reversible and can pump water in addition to generating electricity.
So when these turbines are not generating, they're pumping water back up to the dam?
Indeed, so that the reservoir itself acts as a battery. Then when a peak demand comes along, we can run that water back through the generators, generate further power and satisfy that peak demand.
But what I love about it is the fact that it looks really, really high-tech and futuristic. I know it was built in the 60s, but it's still got that kind of James Bond feel.
Yes,
Yet despite that, it's just simply powered by water falling through a pipe.
Exactly. Very, very fundamental, but very reliable technology.
If the Hollow Mountain, full of generators, is the heart of the Cruachan scheme, then the high-level dam is the head. And it's where I'm going next, following a track which takes me high above Lochs. The efforts of engineers to tame nature here by generating electricity from an artificial loch reminds me of an ancient legend which tells of a local witch, a Cailleach, who lived on Ben Cruachan.
The Cailleach had the task of guarding a sacred well high up on the Ben. During the day, she'd roll away a stone and let the water flow down the mountainside and fill the rivers below. And at night, she'd cover it over again. At least, that's what she was meant to do.
But one night, she forgot. Exhausted, she slept for 3 days and 3 nights. When she awoke, she discovered that the entire glen below had flooded, forming a great loch. This is the fabled origin of Lochs.
Now, if you think of the dam as the Cailleach's well and the water that powers the generators as the flood, then you've got a modern version of the old legend. And from up here, you've got a magnificent view that makes sense of it all. Because down there, we've got the dam, the Cailleach's well. Well, in front of me, we've got the land that was flooded, which today is the mighty and magnificent Lochs, stretching all the way to the horizon and the distant peaks of the Knapdale Hills, making this the perfect place for me to end my grand tour.
Join me on my next grand tour when I'll be exploring the lochs of Scotland's breathtaking northwest.
New Year's Day at 9, the first of a brand new series explores Earth's great rivers. Using the latest camera technology, we'll plunge the depths of the Amazon. And next tonight, Billy Connolly, Made in Scotland.